right now. You think you're inside your head, don't you? Behind your eyes, somewhere up there. But here's the thing that should keep you up at night. No physicist has ever found a you in there. Not in the neurons, not in the signals, not in the chemistry. So, where exactly is your mind? Welcome back to the channel. I'm glad you're here, because today we're going to pull on that thread together, and I promise, if you stay till the very end, the answer is going to completely rewire the way you see yourself. And if you're new here, hit subscribe, because this is what we do. We take the strangest questions in physics, and we don't let go until they make beautiful sense. All right, let's go find your mind. Let me ask you something simple. When you look at a tree right now, where does that experience happen? Most people, if they're honest, will point somewhere behind their eyes. Up here, inside the skull, like there's a little version of you sitting in a tiny theater, watching a screen, pulling levers, making decisions. Philosophers actually have a name for this little guy. They call him the homunculus, Latin for little man. And here's the problem. If there's a little man inside your head watching your experience, then who's watching inside his head? There'd have to be an even smaller man in there. And inside that man, another one, and so on, forever. It's turtles all the way down. The idea collapses the moment you poke it seriously. But don't feel embarrassed for believing it. This intuition is incredibly deep. It's almost certainly built into us. This feeling that there's a center somewhere, a seat of experience, a place where the you actually lives. Now here's where physics walks in and says, gently but firmly, we've looked, it isn't there. Think about what your brain actually is for a moment. It's roughly 100 billion neurons, each one a biological cell, firing tiny electrical signals. Those signals leap across gaps called synapses, triggering other neurons, cascading in patterns of almost unimaginable complexity. That's it. No light, no screen, no audience chamber, no little man with his hands on the controls, just electrochemical signals talking to each other. Now, the natural question, your question, because you're thinking carefully, is fine. But couldn't the mind just be somewhere in all that activity? And that's exactly the right question to ask. Here's a thought experiment that might help. Imagine a city at night, seen from an airplane. You look down and you see light, patterns, grids, rivers of moving cars, clusters of brightness around stadiums and intersections. Now ask yourself, where in that city does the city happen? Is it in one building, one streetlight, one intersection? Of course not. The city isn't located in any single place. It emerges from the relationship between all those parts, the traffic patterns, the electricity grid, the 10 million small decisions people make every second. Your brain is something like that city. The experience, whatever it is, isn't sitting in one neuron. It isn't hiding in your frontal lobe waiting to be found. It seems to arise from the pattern, from the organization, from the relationship between billions of moving pieces. And here's where it starts to get genuinely strange. Because if mind is a pattern, not a place, then you have to ask, what exactly is a pattern? A pattern isn't matter. You can't weigh it. You can't hold it under a microscope. A pattern is information. And information, well, that's a very different kind of thing from atoms and electrons. It can be copied, it can be moved. Theoretically, it isn't even tied to any particular physical substance. Which means the question, where is your mind, might have a far stranger answer than anyone expected. Not nowhere, but also not quite anywhere you can point to. Hold that thought, because in the next section we're going to go one level deeper into what physics says about the atoms that build your brain, and why not one of them has the faintest idea that it's part of you. Here's a fact that sounds simple but gets stranger the longer you sit with it. You are made of atoms, not metaphorically, not as a poetic way of saying you're part of nature. Literally, right now, every cell in your body, every neuron firing in your brain, every fleeting thought you're having about this sentence, all of it is atoms, moving, vibrating, interacting. Oxygen atoms in your blood, carbon atoms in your neurons, hydrogen atoms holding your molecules together like tiny invisible stitches. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. Not one of those atoms knows it's you. Let's be precise about what that means, because it's not just poetic language, it's physics. An atom is, at its core, breathtakingly simple. A nucleus, protons and neutrons, surrounded by a cloud of electrons. That's the whole machine. Atoms don't have preferences. They don't have memories. They don't experience Tuesday afternoons or feel the particular sadness of an old song. They follow rules, quantum mechanical rules, beautifully precise. And that is all they do. A carbon atom in your brain right now is, in every measurable physical sense, identical to a carbon atom in a lump of coal, or in a distant star, or in a pencil sitting on your desk. Same mass, same charge, same quantum behavior. The universe at that level does not distinguish between the carbon that's thinking and the carbon that isn't. Now here's where most people feel a kind of quiet vertigo, and that's the right response, because this raises an almost unbearable question. If the pieces have no experience, no awareness, no sense of self, then how does arranging them produce something that does? This is one of the deepest unsolved problems in all of science. Philosophers call it the hard problem of consciousness. And unlike most hard problems, this one hasn't gotten easier with time. If anything, the more carefully we look, the harder it gets. Let me give you an analogy. Take the letters H, O, and P, and E individually, just marks on a page. No meaning whatsoever. Arrange them as H-O-P-E, and suddenly something extraordinary happens. A meaning appears. An entire emotional landscape opens up. Anticipation, resilience, the future. But if you look at any single letter under a microscope, you will not find the hope inside it. The hope isn't in the letters. It emerges from their relationship, from the pattern, the order, the context. Your mind might be something like that word, not located in any single atom, not hiding in any particular neuron. But somehow, and this is the part physics cannot yet fully explain, emerging from the precise dynamic relationship between 100 billion moving pieces. But here's the twist that makes this even more interesting. Those atoms aren't even permanent residents. The atoms in your body are constantly being replaced. The ones in your brain's water molecules cycle out within weeks. Many of your cellular components are rebuilt over months and years. The specific atoms that were you a decade ago are mostly scattered across the atmosphere, the oceans, other living things. And yet, you persist. Your memories, your personality, your sense of being a continuous self, waking up every morning as the same person who went to sleep, which tells you something profound. Whatever you are, it isn't the atoms. The atoms are more like the river water, always moving, always changing, but the river, the shape, the pattern, the flow that stays. So if you're not the atoms, what exactly are you? That's where we're headed next, because the answer starts to sound less like biology and more like something from the most abstract and beautiful corners of physics, the science of information itself. So we've established something remarkable in the last two sections. Your mind isn't a little man sitting behind your eyes, and it isn't hiding inside any particular atom, because the atoms don't even know they're part of you. So what's left? Well, here's where the thinking gets genuinely exciting, because the answer that physics and neuroscience are slowly, carefully pointing toward isn't matter. It's something far more subtle. It's information. Now, when most people hear the word information, they think of emails, data, binary code, ones and zeros on a hard drive somewhere. But in physics, information is something much deeper and more fundamental than that. Claude Shannon, one of the great mathematical minds of the 20th century, showed us that information, at its core, is about distinction, about difference, about the gap between one state and another. A light switch carries one bit of information, on or off. A coin has two states, heads or tails. The moment you have a system that can be in this state rather than that state, you have information. And your brain? Your brain is running somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 trillion synaptic connections, each one capable of being stronger or weaker, active or quiet, changing moment to moment. The number of possible states your brain can be in is so astronomically large that if you tried to write it out, the number would be longer than the observable universe is wide. That is not an exaggeration. That is just the mathematics of complexity. Here's a thought experiment to make this concrete. Imagine a river again, but this time, pay attention to something specific. The water flowing through it right now will be completely different water next week. Different molecules, different atoms, different everything. But the river has a character. It has a shape. The bend near the old oak tree, the shallow rapid where the children play, the deep still pool near the bank. That shape isn't in the water. The shape is information, encoded in the landscape, in the physics of flow, in the pattern that persists, even as the material constantly changes. Now ask yourself, is your mind more like the water or more like the shape of the river? If what we've figured out so far is right, you are the shape, the pattern, the information structure that persists even as the atoms come and go. But here's where it gets truly deep. In 1961, a physicist named Rolf Landauer made a discovery that quietly shook the foundations of both physics and information theory. He showed that information is physical, not metaphorically, physically. When you erase a bit of information, when a brain forgets, when a computer deletes a file, that act of erasure releases heat into the environment, a tiny, measurable, real amount of energy. What that means is staggering. Information isn't floating above the physical world like some ghostly abstraction. It is woven into the fabric of physics itself. It has thermodynamic consequences. It interacts with energy. It is, in a very precise sense, as real as mass or charge or temperature. So now put it together. You are a pattern of information running on biological hardware, yes. But the pattern is what matters, the arrangement, the relationships between 100 billion neurons shifting and dancing in real time. And that dance, that precise, dynamic, almost incomprehensibly complex dance of electrons leaping across synapses, that is where something like experience seems to arise. Not in any single electron, not in any single neuron, but in the choreography, which raises one final, beautiful, slightly dizzying question. If your mind is fundamentally a pattern of information, and information is physical, then where exactly does the universe end and your mind begin? Because in quantum mechanics, that boundary turns out to be far less clear than anyone feels comfortable admitting, and that is exactly where we're going next. We need to talk about something that has bothered physicists for nearly 100 years, not because they haven't thought about it hard enough, but because the more carefully and honestly you think about it, the stranger it gets. It's the question of what happens when something is observed. Here's where we have to step carefully, because quantum mechanics, the physics of the very small, is not like anything in our everyday experience, and the temptation is to either dismiss it as too abstract to matter or to overstate it into mysticism. We're going to do neither. We're going to follow the physics carefully and honestly and see where it actually leads. Let's start with the famous double-slit experiment, because it's the cleanest place to see the strangeness clearly. You take a beam of electrons, tiny particles, and you fire them at a barrier with two narrow slits cut into it. Behind the barrier is a detector screen. Now, if electrons were simply tiny bullets, you'd expect two neat clusters to appear on the screen, one behind each slit. Clean, logical, predictable. But that's not what happens. What you actually get is an interference pattern, alternating bands of many hits and no hits. The kind of pattern you only get when waves overlap and either reinforce or cancel each other, which means the electron somehow went through both slits simultaneously, like a wave spreading through water, passing through both openings at once, interfering with itself. Strange enough, but here's where it gets genuinely unsettling. The moment you place a detector at the slits, any detector, even a perfectly gentle one, to find out which slit the electron actually went through, the interference pattern vanishes. The electron suddenly behaves like a particle again. One slit, clean cluster, no interference. The act of finding out changes what physically happens. Now, physicists have argued for decades about what this actually means. And I want to be honest with you, there is no consensus. This is genuinely unsettled territory. But here is what the mathematics of quantum mechanics unambiguously tells us. Before measurement, a quantum system exists in a superposition, a combination of multiple possible states simultaneously. It isn't hiding in one state, and we just don't know which. It is, in a precise mathematical sense, genuinely in many states at once. The act of measurement, of interaction, forces the system into one definite outcome. And here is the question that connects this directly to our subject today. What counts as a measurement? What counts as an observer? This is where it gets personally interesting. In the early days of quantum mechanics, some physicists, serious ones, not mystics, suggested that consciousness itself might play a role in collapsing quantum possibilities into definite reality. John von Neumann, one of the most rigorous mathematical minds of the 20th century, traced the chain of physical interactions in a measurement, detector to amplifier to recording device to nervous system, and found himself unable, mathematically, to locate where the superposition definitively ends without eventually invoking a conscious observer. Now, most physicists today are cautious about this interpretation, and rightly so. We should not leap from quantum mechanics is strange to, therefore, consciousness controls reality. That is a leap the physics does not cleanly support. But here is what it does support. The observer is not separate from the experiment. You cannot stand completely outside the system you are measuring. The act of looking, of interacting, is itself a physical event that shapes what you find. And if that's true at the quantum level, if the boundary between the thing observed and the thing observing is genuinely physically blurry, then the old picture of a mind sealed inside a skull, passively watching an independent universe through the windows of its senses, becomes very hard to defend. The universe and the mind that studies it are not two separate things cleanly divided by a wall of bone. They are, in some deep, still poorly understood way, entangled in each other, which brings us to the most beautiful and humbling conclusion this entire journey has been quietly building toward, and that is exactly where we're going in our final section. We've come a long way together in this video. We dismantled the little man behind the eyes. We discovered that your atoms don't know they're you. We found that what you might actually be is a pattern of information, physical, real, woven into the laws of thermodynamics itself. And we stood at the edge of quantum mechanics, where the boundary between the observer and the observed starts to dissolve in a way that no honest physicist can simply wave away. Now, I want to bring all of that together, because individually, each of those ideas is fascinating. But together, they point towards something that I think is one of the most quietly astonishing conclusions in all of science. For most of human history, we have operated with a picture that feels completely obvious and natural. There is the universe, vast, physical, out there, stars, planets, oceans, mountains, other people. And then there is you, a small, separate thing, living inside that universe, looking out at it through your eyes, thinking about it with your brain, occasionally poking it with your hands. The universe is the container. You are the contents. It seems almost too basic to question, but let's question it anyway, because that's what careful thinking demands. Here's a thought experiment. Take a wave in the ocean, simple, beautiful, rolling toward shore. Now ask, where does the wave end and the ocean begin? You can't draw that line cleanly. The wave isn't a separate thing moving through the ocean. It is the ocean doing something, organizing itself locally into a temporary, recognizable pattern. The wave has a shape, a speed, an energy. It feels almost like a thing with its own identity, but pull it out of the ocean and it ceases to exist entirely. Now, you are something like that wave. You are not a separate thing that was placed inside a universe that existed independently of you. You are the universe, locally, temporarily, extraordinarily, organizing itself into a pattern complex enough to become aware of itself. And this isn't poetry. The physics genuinely supports it. Every atom in your body was forged in the nuclear furnace of a star that lived and died before our sun existed. The carbon in your neurons, the oxygen in your blood, the iron that carries it, all of it is stellar material, redistributed across billions of years of cosmic time. You are not visiting the universe. You grew out of it, the way a wave grows out of the ocean, the way a thought grows out of a brain. Now here's the part that I find most moving, and most important to say carefully and honestly. Consciousness, genuine, subjective, first-person experience, remains unexplained by physics, completely, honestly unexplained. We know a great deal about the neural correlates of experience. We know which brain regions activate during certain thoughts. We know how damage to specific areas changes personality and perception. But the fundamental question, why does any of this physical activity feel like anything from the inside, remains genuinely, deeply open. And I think that honesty is important, because the temptation, when you have a beautiful idea, is to stretch it further than the evidence actually reaches. What physics can tell us, firmly, clearly, is this. The old picture of a mind sealed in a skull, entirely separate from the universe it observes, is almost certainly wrong. The boundary is blurry. The observer and the observed are entangled. The information that constitutes your mind is as physical as gravity. So where is your mind really? Not behind your eyes, not in any single atom, not even confined neatly inside your skull. Your mind is a pattern arising from matter, governed by physics, continuous with the universe that produced it. You are the part of the cosmos that has become, for this brief and remarkable moment, aware of itself, which means when you look up at the night sky and feel wonder, the universe isn't just being observed, it is wondering at itself. And I think that is the most extraordinary thing physics has ever quietly told us. So let's sit with what we've actually discovered today. We started with a question so simple it almost felt embarrassing to ask. Where is your mind? And what we found, by following the physics honestly, carefully, without shortcuts, is that the answer is genuinely, beautifully strange. Your mind is not a little man behind your eyes. It is not hiding in any particular atom, because the atoms don't know they're you and never did. It is not a ghost sealed inside a machine of bone and tissue, watching the universe from a safe distance. Your mind is a pattern, a physical, thermodynamically real, extraordinarily complex pattern of information, arising from matter, sustained by energy, shaped by a universe that has been quietly building toward this kind of complexity for nearly 14 billion years. And the boundary between that pattern and the rest of the universe, the line between the observer and the observed, is far blurrier, far more entangled, far more mysterious than anyone in the history of science originally expected. Now, I want to say one more thing before we close, and I want to say it carefully. None of what we covered today fully solves the mystery of consciousness. The hard problem remains hard. The question of why physical patterns produce felt experience, why there is something it is like to be you, is still open, genuinely, honestly open. And that is not a failure of science. That is science working exactly as it should, following evidence with integrity, refusing to pretend certainty where none exists, and having the courage to sit with a question that is still larger than its answer. The greatest thing physics has ever given us isn't a final answer. It's a better question. And the better question, the one I hope you carry with you after today, is not just where your mind is. It's what kind of thing a mind must be if it can arise from atoms that feel nothing and yet somehow look up at the stars and feel wonder. That question, I think, is worth a lifetime of careful thinking. If this video made you see yourself, even slightly, differently than you did an hour ago, then we did exactly what we set out to do. Please share it with someone who loves to think. Leave a comment below with the moment that surprised you most. I genuinely read them, and the conversations that happen down there are often as good as the video itself. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is what we do here. We take the deepest, strangest, most honest questions in physics, and we follow them together, carefully, clearly, and without pretending the universe is simpler than it actually is. There are more questions waiting, and I think you're exactly the kind of person who wants to ask them. So, I'll see you in the next one.